All right, we are here, and we're going to talk about, well, two evil groups, essentially. Gangsters
I don't know.
and Nazis. I mean, well, what do you want?
I don't know. It's the mob and the Nazis. You got to pick. It's like when the communists were fighting the Nazis, I think, in North Carolina when they had that shootout in the 80s. You didn't know who to root for, the commies or the American Nazi Party.
Right. I mean, we generally love the mob in our movies, but I don't know if we like them necessarily in real life.
Well, you're going to like them in this story because they go above and beyond their they shed their mob stuff to become patriotic. So you are going to like the mob in this one.
Okay, so the mob will win today.
The mob wins today. That's all I could say to you. It's a good day for the mob. If you're a Godfather fan, you're going to love this episode because there's a lot of crap in here. A lot of, what do they call it? Easter eggs, Hunley?
Easter eggs. You call them dots, I thought, right?
Dots. Yeah, there are a lot of dots in here because all of these people, there's a lot of people in here, and each of them deserve their own episode and may indeed get their own episodes. If Eric and I could pull it together. So I don't want to go deep on each cat who is in this thing because we may do an episode on each individual. So we're just going to there's so many big names in this thing. There's so many big people that I don't want to go lost down a rabbit hole on each one because we'll be here for days.
Yeah, one of which we've already spoken about before, Mickey Cohen, I think, comes up. We've had a show with him.
Yeah, well, a lot of these people you've heard before, so we'll get to Mickey Cohen at one point. But the first guy is this guy, Fritz Kuhn, who has not had his own show because he's a Nazi. Okay. Nazis don't get their own shows. But I don't know if you have a picture of this cat. This guy, Fritz Kuhn, is a German immigrant who comes to the East Coast. Actually, I'll back up. I just remembered something about Fritz Kuhn. Fritz Kuhn is the Hitler of the United States. You could show the pictures. Fritz Kuhn wants to be the Hitler of the United States. His plans that Hitler has to invade the United States. Hitler thinks he's eventually going to get to the United States. This is him meeting with Hitler in Berlin with some of his men. These are Americans born in Germany who create the German-American Bund. This is not to be confused with the American Nazi Party later with Lincoln Rockwell and the right-wing thing. This is an earlier version in the 1933 when Hitler invades, and this is actually the re-election of Kuhn right there. That's when he got re-elected to be the head of the Nazis, the American Nazis. So this guy, he wants to be the Hitler. And he speaks with a German accent. He is German. He ends up, when he was going to school, before he becomes the head of the German-American Bund, which is based on the Upper East Side of New York in Yorkville, where I lived for a number of years on East 83rd Street up there. It's still a German, heavily German community. There's millions and millions of Germans in the United States legally. This is Fritz Kuhn doing his Hitler thing. And he was an orator and had, by some estimates, 150,000 Nazis operating under him. This was not for fun because they planned to invade the United States and have a presence here. One of the reasons I want to do this episode is because we're seeing the same thing happen again. Most of these episodes are done because they have resonance to the news of today. You've got tens of thousands of Chinese coming across the border. It's making a lot of people nervous. You've got these Palestinians going crazy, saying death to America, death to the Jews, making a lot of Jews nervous. It's in the air. So I wanted to show people the same story from 1933 to 1941, which is what this area covers, maybe a little bit afterwards, but mostly in that window there. So there are people, it was called America First, like Charles Lindbergh, who's an American hero, and he goes over and meets with Hitler. And there's Henry Ford, who's got his picture on the wall in Hitler's office. But ironically, Fritz Kuhn works in a hospital in Dearborn, Michigan, called the Henry Ford Hospital that doesn't allow Jews. I didn't know there was a hospital that we did an episode on Henry Ford, right? It's a one or two part.
One part
on Henry Ford. I didn't know about this hospital. Henry Ford had an anti-Semitic, no Jews allowed hospital. That's how nice of a guy he was. And guess who worked there? Fritz Kuhn. And he learned a lot of his anti-Semitic stuff from Henry Ford, which is why this stuff is important. So he comes to New York and he starts to set up his operation with the German-American Bund. So there's a lot of Germans, it still is, in a certain area of New Jersey and certain areas, mostly not on Long Island, but a lot of them in Jersey. There's a lot of nasty Nazi descendants who still live in New Jersey. And you people know who I'm talking about if you're from Jersey. And we'll hear about it in the comment section. But they're Andover is, you may want to look at Andover, New Jersey, and some places like that. But it was a stronghold of Nazis. Let me just put it that way. So they begin to mimic Hitler Youth and Nazis and parades and everything else. And this is not, they're training them. They're doing all kinds of things. And Eric can show you a couple of photos of what we've pulled out of the historical record on this to show you what I'm talking about, because it's quite visual. And at the time, yeah, these are the Nazi kids. This is in Andover, New Jersey, July 21st, 1937. This is one of their flag ceremonies, the raising and lowering. I think they're lowering both the Nazi flag and the American flag. So they have both flags there. These are American kids. This is their summer camp to learn about Nazi stuff and how to be Hitler Youth. There's a couple others. This is for the Hindenburg. They're lowering a flag. These are the Nazi doing a flag ceremony in Griggstown, New Jersey, wherever Griggstown, New Jersey is. I've never heard of it, but it's a salute to Hindenburg, oddly enough. There's a couple of others that just of the camping stuff out on Long Island past Medford. And my Uncle Lenny used to live in Medford, which is pretty far out in Suffolk County. But this is Adolf Hitler Strasse, and that's at Camp Siegfried in Yaphank, Long Island. Yaphank is a little bit, for people from the island, it's really the F out there past Medford in Suffolk County. Here's like a little parade going on of Nazis. This is a good parade. That's at Camp Siegfried in Long Island, that one, by the way, out in Yaphank. This is another one. This is a Nazi. This is their summer. This is how they spent their summer. And Hoover's not onto this because Hoover is concerned with commies. So he's not hip to the Nazis yet. He will get hip to the Nazis because saboteurs show up and they start doing Nazi sabotage stuff in the United States. This is another real good one of the camp. Let me see. I think this might be Yaphank. Oh no, that's Sussex Hill. That's Camp Nordland. That's Camp Nordland in Sussex Hill, New Jersey, July 18th, 1937. This is another Nazi hangout in Jersey. Again, these are rural areas where they're having these summer camps. But they're eating German food. There's some regular German stuff going on. You know, but Fritz Kuhn is their leader, and Fritz Kuhn has various plots that he's involved in. He hates FDR. He hates that he's siding with England. They will do certain things. And again, this is Fritz Kuhn acting as Hitler. He takes orders from Berlin. There's stuff coming in from Goebbels. They want to take over the Hollywood film industry, which we're going to get to in a couple of minutes. But if you could show, I just want to show this parade on East 86th Street. There's one out in an urban environment that you see, and I didn't know where it was, but it's East 86th Street is like their intersection in Yorkville where all the stores are. This is it. Yeah. I thought this was somewhere else. This is East 86th Street. I used to live on East 83rd with a landlord named Perupsky, who was actually an ex-concentration camp guard and who had numbers on the bottom of every plate and thing in the apartment. If you lost anything, had a number on the bottom or broke it. He was a tough landlord. Anyway, so this is East 86th Street. And the idea that they're marching with Nazi flags and American flags in full uniform does not go unnoticed by certain people in New York. Okay, so there's a guy in New York at the time, and his name is Nathan Perlman. And Nathan Perlman is a judge. He's a city judge, but he was also a congressman. Replaced LaGuardia actually as the congressional seat. I think it was the 14th district. He for 7 or 8 years, and then New York State Assembly. He will be a judge in New York. This is Nathan Perlman. He was a Republican. He was a guy who had a lot of stature and a lot of power in New York, having been a congressman, an assemblyman, and then finally a judge. Nathan Perlman doesn't know what to do about the Nazis because legally they have the right to march, Eric. They have the right to do what they're doing.
Sure.
But he knows underneath that it's all bullshit because he's got people sending him letters from Germany of what they're doing to the Jews. This is not in the New York Times, but the Jews are being rounded up, and Jews in New York specifically, this is after he died later on, that's down by Stuyvesant Town, which is like 14th Street on the east side. I think that's 15th and 1st or something over there. That was named later on after he died. But Perlman doesn't know what to do. He talks to some other cats. He talks to Stephen Wise. Stephen Wise is the biggest rabbi in New York. There's a synagogue, huge New York. The biggest synagogue in New York today is named after Wise, Rabbi Wise. So he calls up Rabbi Wise and some other heavyweight Jews, and he says, what are we going to do here? And they said there's nothing we could do. And they're going, but they're training internally to invade us. And he knows this, they know this, and they're training Americans to be part of this Hitler Youth. But legally, their hands are tied, Eric. And these are men of the law. They're not corrupt. They're guys who who went to, good schools. It's not like today. These guys actually were upstanding citizens in the community. So they don't know what to do. So they're ripping their hair out. And Perlman knows a guy from his court days, and he decides to call up this guy and talk to him. And maybe you could show a picture of the guy he calls up.
Oh, I'm going to guess that it's this guy, but I could be wrong.
He calls up this guy. All right. Now, this guy, this guy's Meyer Lansky. Now, Meyer Lansky is, just so everyone knows who Meyer Lansky is, if you don't know who Meyer Lansky is at this point, he used to have a gang called the Bugsy Meyer Gang. This is before Murder Incorporated. This is obviously the thumbnail that Eric created. So that's 86th Street in the back. That's Meyer Lansky. It's on the Lower East Side of New York. Meyer Lansky's father disappeared, then his mother disappeared, and he had to learn how to live on the streets, on his own. When he was about 11, he encounters a guy named Bugsy Siegel, who, with his group, his friends growing up are Bugsy Siegel, and later on he encounters a guy named Charles Luciano, who tries to shake him down for money. So Luciano's about 5 years older than him, with his guys, Italians, and they try to rough him up, and the kid tells them to go F themselves. So Luciano is completely impressed by the balls of Meyer Lansky. And this is Lucky Luciano, of course, who will later come into this story because he's going to help the feds as well. So Luciano, who must have been like 15, and let's say that Lansky was like 11 or 12. And Lansky was a very short guy, and Luciano was a starker. And so anyway, he was so impressed by the balls of Lansky that they become best friends. And Lansky's claim to fame is he knew math inside and out. He had a mind that was like a computer, and he was able to calculate and remember numbers and do math at lightning speed. One of those guys, Eric. I don't know even know what that's called, but it's a thing, autodidact or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. Later on, when they open up casinos, the reason that Lansky is involved in casinos is he's mathematically able to figure out the odds without corrupting the game, to let the house win, knowing all the odds of each game. That was Lansky's claim to fame. Lansky took dice from the concrete to the felt. No one had ever put dice on felt before. That's what he did. He took craps and put it on a table. It's never been off the concrete of the street. So he's involved in a couple of little things in New York growing up as a child, some knifings, some violence, and he hooks up with Bugsy Siegel. these kids all grew up in the same block. They grew up in a block where my dad grew up in Brownsville. Okay. So in Brownsville, there are these Italians and there are these Jews. There's no Irish. They're just Irish are in another end of the neighborhood. So these Italians and Jews bond because they all live together in the same neighborhood, and they're essentially smushed together, and they get along, and they hang out at a place called Rosie Gold's Candy Store. Rosie Gold is a woman who's in her 60s who allows them to operate out of this candy store in Brownsville. Now, my dad, this is one of these stories where, again, there's some family connection to this thing. My dad down the street had a coffee shop before my Uncle Louis had the coffee shop on 42nd Street. When these guys had a coffee shop called Three Brothers, and it was my dad, my Uncle Louis, and my Uncle Herman. So also in Brownsville, and a lot of stuff went on there, but most of the stuff went on. Murder Incorporated hung out at Rosie Gold's Candy Store, and in the back was where they had a little room where they did their stuff. Hid their weapons, connived, schemed, met up. They had a payphone. Nobody had a phone then, so if you got a call, it had to come to that payphone in her candy store. Candy store stayed open till midnight. She ran some girls upstairs. There was some gambling in the back. Some stuff was going on all the time at Rosie's. So these guys conspired, and they're in there doing their different things. But the first gang that they put together is the Bugsy Meyer gang. So this guy, it's a great shot. These guys get a call from Nathan Perlman. And Nathan Perlman says to them, to Lansky, who he knew from some court cases, he says, we'd like to find out if you're interested in putting a group together to confront these Nazis. And Lansky goes, are you kidding? He hates Nazis, right? So they have, he says, we'll kill them for you. And Perlman goes, no. We don't want you to kill them. We just want you to rough them up. And Lansky goes, I don't know. We'd rather kill them. And Perlman talks him down from the killing. And he says, look, and Stephen Wise is on there too, who will later deny it, the rabbi. He's contacting Lansky as well. And he says, look, we just want to intimidate them and stop them and rough them up and push back against this Nazi infringement. So Lansky goes, I'll be happy to do it. So Perlman says, I will supply all the money you need and all the lawyers if you get arrested or in any trouble. Lansky says, I won't hear of that. We'll do everything on the arm. I'll take care of everything. I don't want your money. We're going to do this ourselves. Okay. That's where the story starts. So Lansky puts together some guys, mostly Jews, but there's a couple of Italians in there, in this group to fight the Nazis. And this is where the Jewish mob begins to fight back against the Nazis. So what do? Here's an actual photo. This is in Union City, New Jersey, by the way, in a Nazi meeting hall. They begin to bust open these meetings that the Nazis are having with sticks and clubs. They put on American Legion hats just so they wouldn't look like they were just thugs coming out of nowhere. They threw the hats away when they left. But they would find out where these Nazis were having their meetings. And there would be 300 to 500 Nazis in the meeting, and 30 of these guys would go in there. They took a lot of prize fighters with them who were Jewish, and that was part of their crew. And you'll see as we go across the country how this spreads. Now, this is outside the Garden in 1939, which we'll get to in a second. But up until this time, these meetings are being held in Westchester. They move out of the city. The Nazis know that these guys are coming, and they're getting their heads smashed in by Lansky and his boys. And I mean, they're throwing them out of windows, Eric. It really is violent. They're breaking their legs. They're beating them with baseball bats, but they're not killing them. And they could kill them, but they don't, because this is what Perlman insists. And they're hospitalizing them. Hold on, Eric's doing it too.
Cheers.
So they're hospitalizing a lot of Nazis, and the Nazis begin to go slightly more underground. They stop these parades. There's pushback, and other citizens are beginning to hear about this on the front page of the newspapers. And there's headlines, 5 Nazis injured in melee with mobsters. This begins to spread around the city. they begin to go to New Jersey. That's where that photo is. They end up in Union City, New Jersey. The mob goes over there. This is all Jewish mob, by the way. This is not Italians. These are all Mendy Weiss. These are all Murder Incorporated guys who hang out in that in Rosie Gold's luncheonette. So they begin to beat the living shit out of them everywhere. But they have funding and money from Berlin, which leads to this situation in Madison Square Garden in 1939. This is the old Madison Square Garden, not to be confused with the Madison Square Garden on 32nd Street later. But maybe Eric can show this photo of the situation at the Garden. Now,
they had a small gathering there.
This is a small gathering of Nazis. Okay, this is 28,000 Nazis, not in Berlin, but in Manhattan, New York. I mean, I know it's hard to understand, but this is where this thing is going today. The reason I want to do this is these could be Hamas's people and pro-Palestinian people and whoever else hates our guts forming these type of rallies, because this is where we're going, people. This is New York. This is not 10 light years away in another nation. This is the biggest city in the country, and you've all seen what's been going on in New York the past couple of years. So don't rule this out, which is why I wanted to do the episode. This is outside in the street. The mob, the Jewish mob, helped organize 10, I don't know how many thousands of New Yorkers are there. And the mayor sent in about 1,500 horse cops. And this is Gonzalez knows about these horse cops. And they were putting a line of horses between them and the Garden. And outside were these guys waiting for them. So there's a couple of photos that I found of these guys coming out. One of them you just showed about the guy trying to get into a cab, that young Nazi. And another one, this is a guy they get outside. They beat the living shit out of that Nazi. But inside is Fritz Kuhn. And there's some photos I gave you about Fritz Kuhn. There's a guy, I wanted to show this photo of a guy named Izzy Greenbaum, who's 26. Yeah, look at this. This is the cops, trying to keep the demonstrators at bay. Because there's so many more demonstrators. But you're talking about 28,000 people who had to leave the freaking Garden and get to where they were going. So they were hunted down all across those streets between there and the subway or their cars. Inside, while he's speaking, there's a couple of things that happen. One is this woman named Dorothy Thompson. Dorothy Thompson was the wife. Okay, so this is a guy named Izzy Greenbaum, 26 years old, a hospital worker, who just says, screw it, and rushes the stage to punch Kuhn in the face. He is brought down by the Nazis, and they rip his clothes off until he's naked and throw him out into the audience. Okay, so Izzy Greenbaum got severely beaten by those Nazis right there. But in the audience is also a woman who stands up and yells, bunk. This is all bunk. And she's a blonde woman who's the wife of Sinclair Lewis, who wrote the famous book, It Can't Happen Here, about the Nazis taking over the United States. She's a columnist in New York, Dorothy Thompson, but she's married to the legendary writer Sinclair Lewis. And she is surrounded by Nazis who they lift her up and they escort her out of the building.
I'm trying to find that shot of her.
She's a blonde woman, I think, in her 40s. If you have that photo. If not, I mean, this is February 20th, 1939, if that helps you. There she is. Yeah. The Nazis surround her. She has the balls to stand up with 28,000 people and just keep yelling, this is bunk, because of her husband and her own political views. So they remove her from the building. They don't beat her up, but they remove her. And anyway, so they have this rally and they give these speeches, death to the Jews. The Jews caused this, Jews caused that. And keep in mind, this is 1939. This is literally less than 2 years before we enter the war. But the Nazis are sinking U.S. ships off the coast, merchant ships, U-2 boats are sinking all of our vessels as soon as they're coming out of Brooklyn. So Thomas Dewey also calls up Lansky and says, can you help us at the Navy Yard in Brooklyn? We're getting our ass kicked here. So Lansky says, well, you can help me with my friend who's up in Dannemora doing time, and his name is Lucky Luciano. If you could get him out, then we could do something controlling the docks in Brooklyn. I guarantee you're not going to have any more goddamn saboteurs. So he goes up, Lansky, with the police and the prosecutors, go up to Dannemora and with the FBI, and they talk to Luciano, and they said, "Can you help us?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "But I can't do anything in here." So they take Lucky Luciano gets out of Dannemora because of Lansky, and he will eventually be deported back to Sicily. But it's better than being in Dannemora. So he draws up maps also for the invasion of Sicily when we do, in 44, 45, when we invade Sicily, which is 4 or 5 years later. But right now in 39, what Luciano is doing, he's controlling the docks and the whole shipping industry from Dannemora. He didn't give up his power to just because he went to prison. So he says to Lansky, "Go see my guy," and he tells the FBI the same thing. But the FBI doesn't want to get involved in this. So who does Lansky go to see? He goes down to Church Street in Manhattan. What's on Church Street in Manhattan? The headquarters for an obscure intelligence operation called ONI. Lansky walks into the ONI offices and he says, "I'm Meyer Lansky." And they said, "We know, we've been waiting for you." So this is the Office of Naval Intelligence because they are controlling the docks in Brooklyn, which these subs are in the periphery. German subs are picking off our boats left and right in the Atlantic, but they're all coming out of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, maybe some out of Philly, but it's all mostly Brooklyn Navy Yard. So the docks there are controlled by Luciano and the mob. And Lansky says, "I think we can help you." And they intimidate and go after and out every German spy that's mixed in with the longshoremen, beat them and kill them and throw them into the water. And he says, "You're not going to have any problems with saboteurs in Brooklyn anymore." And that was true. And that's from Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano, but mostly Lansky who took the initiative to do this. He gets his best friend, second best friend, actually, Luciano, to be deported to Sicily. And then what Luciano does in Sicily is he helps the American military in their landing in Sicily by rounding up friendlies who can help with the back roads and all the stuff in Italy. He will, interestingly enough, he has a party aboard a ship right there in the harbor when he's being deported. And every mobster in the city comes aboard the ship. They party for 3 days with girls, prostitutes, liquor, everything you could imagine. That party goes on for 3 days. And every gangster who heads a family is in that stateroom that's reserved for Lucky Luciano's deportation to Italy. He will later come back with a phony passport to Cuba. He will meet up with Lansky later in Cuba when they open the casinos under Batista, which is a separate part of this story. But Luciano, because of his friend Lansky, gets to live out his life in Italy. Now, these guys all wanted to get rid of the Mustache Pete's. The Mustache Pete's, this is just a digression, but the Mustache Pete's were the old Italian Sicilians who came to New York and took over the mob, Manzana, and some of these old Mustache Pete's came there because of a guy, El Duce, who kicked them out of Italy. So when they got kicked out of Italy by El Duce, Mussolini, where did they go? They came to New York, just like certain bad elements who came here under, recently under false IDs or whatever. He sent, not unlike Castro with the Muriel boat lift, where he sent his prisoners. That's what Mussolini did. So these guys set up bloodthirsty crime, killing families. And Lansky said with Bugsy Siegel, "This is out of control. This is out of control. We got to get this thing organized. These guys just got here and they're killing everyone in sight, Eric. I mean, they were brutal." So what does Lansky and Bugsy Siegel and Lucky Luciano do? They decide to kill all the Mustache Pete's. And they one by one, they assassinate all of them. And this is where Arnold Roth comes in, because Arnold Rothstein, the brain, tells them he's not going to survive. Rothstein, I think he's killed in 1929 in a hotel. He's not going to survive to live out his full dream. But Rothstein is so wealthy and so big and invests in so many legitimate businesses because he has all these different gambling things. he tells Lansky, and he takes Lansky and Bugsy Siegel, just so you know the generational difference here, he takes them under his wing. And Rothstein is their father figure. Rothstein teaches them that you have to put together a organization. And this is where the idea that Lucky Luciano will implement, that Lansky and Siegel sell to Lucky Luciano, is to have a consolidation of the families. This becomes organized crime. This becomes the combination. This becomes the first normalization of organized crime in American history, where they lay down rules. And the rules that they lay down are the 5 families. Each family controls, and there's other families. It changes over time because different families die off, guys go to prison. But essentially, the structure of it is intact. In other words, you can't whack a guy in another family unless you get the approval of the whole family. You have to have unanimous consent for that. They devise a way to divide up the money in the city through Lansky's mathematical skills. They become a voting block. Now, one of the voting blocks they come up with is the fact that to whack a guy in another family or to whack another mobster, you have to have the vote of the family, the different families. But they don't want the other families to kill a mobster in another family. So what do? They come up with a thing called Murder Incorporated. Murder Incorporated is an organization that hangs out at Rosie Gold's coffee shop, candy store, and they are murderers for hire by all the 5 families. That's all they do. That's all they do is kill other gangsters with the approval of the organized crime combination of these families.
It's called niching down, Mark.
Whatever it's called, these guys sit around all day in this candy store waiting for a contract on so-and-so. And, you know, there's Louis Lepke Buckhalter, there's Mendy Weiss, there's all these legendary cats. And, Mendy Weiss and Buckhalter with with Capone, not Al Capone. This must be, is this Mendy Weiss? Or?
It's Mendy.
Yeah. They're going on a train. I mean, I think Lepke killed about 80 people by himself, but they will eventually, in 1944, they will be sent to, now this is really weird to digress just a second, because Lepke, Mendy Weiss, and Capone, not related to Al Capone, there's another Capone who also comes over from Italy. They will be sent to a place called Sing Sing Prison. And in Sing Sing Prison, hey, how's it going? They're sent to the electric chair in 1944, and all 3 of them are fried. But there's so many reversals of their execution that it really becomes so bizarre, where they've said goodbye, had their last meals 3 times. They go to the dance hall. If you know what the dance hall is, if you followed the Alabama Pitts episode, because Alabama Pitts was up there, the baseball player, at the same time. When you follow the storyline of their execution, which is a little separate story from this, if I can just digress, Dewey, who is their arch nemesis, is now the governor of New York, and he begins to give them last minute stays of execution 3 times. They've had their heads shaved, Eric. They've had rabbis come. They've had their last meal. They all have the last meal with steak, French fries, fried chicken, lettuce and tomato, buttered rolls, pickles, and all this stuff. All of them have the same meal, all 3 of them. And they go to get fried, and they go, whoa, telephone call from the governor, telephone, back to their cells. And this goes on and on. Eventually they're fried, and the same night. Back in that time, Sing Sing would fry you in 2s and 3s on the same night.
Like Rosenberg's.
Right. But that happened with regular criminals too. They would fry you, even if you're not connected. These 3 guys happen to be connected to each other, but they all got fried together.
Yeah, it was like execution night.
Yeah, you could see the lights dim in Ossining, the town next door. And they would just, rah, rah, rah. But it took like 4 hits to get all 3 of them on each of them. So that was kind of crazy. So the head of Murder Incorporated is Albert Anastasia. He's the guy in charge. But underneath them are these guys, Louis Buckhalter, Abe Kid Twist Rellis, who strangled people. Rellis was a guy who used the rope. I think who's that on the left? That's
Abe.
That's Abe Kid Twist-Rose on the left, and that's Bugsy Goldstein, not to be confused with Bugsy Siegel on the right. By the way, there's a lot of cats named Bugsy because Bugsy meant crazy, so that would be like Crazy Siegel, Crazy Goldstein, Bugsy. And this is on the left,
Bugsy again.
Goldstein, but not
crazy. Right.
Okay, right.
And then Harry Pep Strauss, who was also in the
Pep was one of them too. Pep was another killer. These are all Murder Incorporated people. Okay, so these people were involved with Lansky doing the beatdowns for fun on the Nazis because they were Jews first, and they had to do what they had to do to stop the Nazis. This will all end in 1941 when we go to war against the Nazis. But right now, in 39, 38, and 37, in this period of time, they are implementing beatdowns of Nazis all through New York. Now, you say, what about these other cities? There's Nazis over in other places. So Lansky gets on the blower, and he calls up a guy in Chicago, and the guy's name is Jacob Greasy Fingers Guzik. Now, Guzik is the Lansky of Al Capone in Chicago. Guzik is the brains, the accountant, the math guy for Al Capone. Here's Guzik right here, Greasy Finger. And he would do the mob payoffs to the police. And he was the accountant for, also Jewish, he was the accountant for Al Capone. He was his Jew brain. So he calls up Guzik, and Guzik says, I'm going to have to get the permission of the boss. So he says, go ahead. So he goes to Capone, and Capone goes, of course, I hate Nazis. So Capone gives him the green light. So he forms a group, Guzik. And Guzik's group involves, same thing, various boxers, various people, thugs, Jewish mobsters who are in Chicago. And one of them is a fighter named Barney Ross. Now, Barney Ross is a legend. Barney Ross is the greatest Jewish fighter of all time. And he's brought into this thing. And Barney Ross says, I can't punch these guys with my fist because these are weapons of death. That's Barney Ross. Now, Barney Ross is a guy who has, his actual name was Rossovsky. His dad was a rabbi. This was not a thug. Barney Ross's dad was a rabbi, and he was studying to be a rabbi, Rossovsky, before he had any idea of being a boxer. So what happens to Barney Ross? The Barney Ross is involved in this, and they give Barney Ross like a blackjack so he could hit the Nazis with the blackjack. And in Chicago, there's a lot more Nazis there because there's a whole Eastern European community there. And one day, his father is brutally murdered, his rabbi father, in a grocery store robbery, and his mother goes insane. And in the same week that his father is killed, his mother goes insane and is put into a mental institution. And now he's on his own. He's like 14 years old, and he's running the streets. He turns his back on religion. He says, F this. A lot of good my father's teachings did me. And he becomes a street thug and begins to take up boxing. And one of his friends in the street thuggery is a guy named Jacob Rubenstein. And Jacob Rubenstein is his best friend. Jacob Rubenstein is so close to him that Jacob Rubenstein will end up in his corner for all of his fights. And Jacob Rubenstein is shown here. This is in a fight in Dallas, though, years later. Jacob Rubenstein's mother, just so you know, his mother goes insane. This is Rubenstein when he's in the army. This is when the war starts. This is probably a USO event. But Jacob Rubenstein is the fifth of 8 children of Joseph and Fanny Rubenstein, both illiterate Jews. His father is some sort of a carpenter or whatever the hell he is. It was an arranged marriage in Poland, so they didn't even know each other when they came over here. The dad's violent. He's alcoholic. He leaves, and his mother goes insane and is institutionalized. And that is the bond between him and Barney Ross. That both their mothers go insane and are institutionalized. So they run together on the streets. And Rubenstein's main thing is scalping tickets at like big Chicago Cub games and big events in Chicago. He becomes a ticket scalper. He starts to work underneath the Capone umbrella of different little lower level thugs. And he's, kicking back some money to those people. But basically, he is a thug for hire, and he gets the call from Guzik along with Barney Ross, and they begin to have these meetings of where the Nazis are in Chicago, and they begin to bust Nazi heads, these Jewish thugs from Chicago. And Barney Ross, just so you don't know who Barney Ross is, because Barney Ross is a boxer who is revered in the Jewish community. So Barney Ross, and his fighting, just in Barney Ross's fighting, he held championships, and no one had ever done this before, in 3 different weight classes. I don't know if it's since been broken as a record, but I mean, Ross was a lightweight, a light welterweight, and a welterweight, and held the championship in all 3. Won the Golden Gloves in Chicago, Golden Gloves in Chicago, and works his way up as a professional fighter. And in his corner is this guy, Sparky Rubenstein. So he fights and he wins. His record was 72-4 lifetime, right? That's how good of a fighter this guy was. He's ranked as 21st in boxing history as one of the 21st greatest fighters of all time. So what does he do? He wins all these championships. The war starts, and he enlists, becomes a Marine. This is Barney Ross. Goes to San Diego, punches a commanding officer in the face who makes a anti-Semitic remark as soon as he gets there. He's put into the brig. He's court-martialed. And they were going to use him like they did with other celebrities, Eric, and not put them in battle, but use them for promotion and morale.
And all that.
Right. So he was kind of earmarked to do that. But when he knocked out his commanding officer in San Diego and put into the brig and court-martialed, they said, the only thing we could do for you is send you to a place called Guadalcanal. And he said, thank you. That's what he said. I just want to kill Japs. And they said, well, you're going to have a chance to kill Japs. So he's with a platoon. He's got 4 men. I don't know, a platoon, but they broke up into a group of 4 men. And they're overtaken in the middle. And there's a sidebar to this story, so hang on. He's overtaken by about 20 to 40 Japs, right? And the 3 men next to him are just riddled with bullets and cannot fight back. He's riddled with bullets, but he can fight back. He takes all their guns and ammo, including their grenades, and he kills the 20 Japs that are attacking them in the middle of the night. He then carries the one living guy. The 2 guys die, his 2 friends. The one guy he carries is still alive. He weighs 240 pounds. Now, Barney Ross weighs 140. He carries him on his back, back behind enemy lines, and saves his life. The guy who he carries on his back, 240 pounds, and he's wounded. He gets a presidential citation, a Silver Star, and becomes a war hero for this event. This event will then, because of his wounds, Barney Ross will become addicted to morphine, and becomes addicted to morphine because they're giving him tons of morphine in the hospital. And Barney Ross somehow is able to kick his morphine addiction. And in 1957, they make a film about Barney Ross's addiction called Monkey on My Back, which I don't know if anybody's ever seen. It's a rare film. But he kicks morphine, and he goes around the country in 1957 talking about the evils of narcotics and how kids have to stay away from them. So Barney Ross is an unusual figure to be involved in this, but there are others as we go across the country who are doing this Nazi busting. And Sparky, his best friend Sparky will get into trouble later, as we know. Sparky got his finger bitten off in one of these fights with the Nazis, his pinky finger, and he had to shoot his gun with the other finger and put his hand on top of the gun. A lot of people thought that was some sort of mob gun holding device. It was simply because his pinky was gone, and hence one of his nicknames was Pinky. But Jacob Rubenstein's pinky was bit off. Now, a lot of you may know Jacob Rubenstein as Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby will, as Eric showed, he's at a fight there in Dallas. He was a brawler himself. He will later do something wrong with Oswald. And when he stands trial, this guy shows up at the trial as one of his best character witnesses. And that is his old friend, Barney Ross. And Barney Ross takes the stand to defend his old friend, Jacob Rubenstein. That's the loyalty that Barney Ross had with Jack Ruby. Didn't do him any good, but eventually it did do him good because the trial was overturned. And I guess that's him in the South Pacific there
Yeah,
on the
World War
right.
II.
Yeah, that's a great photo. Fantastic. I don't know what he's got on his left hand there, but he was riddled with bullets himself. But he did get the Silver Star for that. And this is a guy from the streets. Again, his mother goes insane. His father's riddled with bullets himself in a grocery store robbery. Was supposed to be a rabbi and himself, and the father was a rabbi. And that's what happened with Barney Ross. So Barney Ross and this group in Chicago, there's a guy named Herb Bryn. Now, Herb Bryn is a journalist in Chicago, and he is a Jew as well. He's an investigative reporter, but he has blonde hair and blue eyes. Okay, so they take Herb Bryn, who's an award-winning journalist, and they make him or bring him in to suggest this Herb Bryn. Herb Bryn will later come out to LA and work with the LA Times and win awards out here. But in this point in the story, he's in Chicago. So Herb Bryn, because he doesn't look like a Jewish stereotype, infiltrates the German-American Bund meetings. And he begins to tell the mobsters where the meetings are and what's going on. So Herb Bryn is almost caught by the Nazis, is almost outed by the Nazis on numerous occasions. They sent him a honeypot Nazi to try to lure him into, but he was getting married. They try to lure him in with a smoking hot Nazi, but he didn't take the bait. And Herb Bryn deserves a lot of mention for the courageous work that he did in infiltrating the Nazis in the United States at this time. There's also a guy named Berman, David Berman, who was a Jewish gangster who infiltrates the silver shirts up in Minnesota, an Elks Club. But we're going to get into the silver shirts in a second when we go to LA. So these guys are infiltrated and beaten down by the mob. Again, this is through Lansky, and this is through the judge, who are riding on top of this thing, getting reports on all of this stuff. Now, at this point, we have to move to Los Angeles, California, because in Los Angeles, California, in Southern California, there's a lot of Nazis back in those days, and it was a hotbed of Nazis. And what they wanted to do, Goebbels wanted to take over the film industry. They were enamored. The German film industry was even stronger than the United States film industry. Their films were so powerful. I'm talking about incredible films. They had a woman from Sweden who will eventually leave, one of her first films, Ingrid Bergman, who was one of the stars of the Nazi films. These films, if you can see any documentaries about the Nazi film industry, way ahead of ours, way ahead, cinematography-wise, script-wise. But Hitler,
Fritz Lang.
everybody fled. Everybody came over here. They had a brain drain of filmmakers because they fled to the United States. So Hitler wanted to take over the American film industry. And what he did was infiltrated from the top down. They fired, unbeknownst to the Jewish studio heads on top, they infiltrated and below the line, over a period of 3 years, got rid of every Jew below the line, working class Jews who were in the film business. They got rid of all of them. And then there was a guy who brought this to the attention of the studio heads. And there was a guy named Leon Lewis. He was the head of the Anti-Defamation League in LA in 1934. And he calls a meeting of the top, I want to say the top 40 or 50 Hollywood Jewish moguls, agents, producers. And he meets them in the country club, which was a Jewish country club that only the Jews could go to. And I think O.J. Simpson later got into it, but at that point it was all Jews. And he has a meeting with them and he tells them for the first time what's going on. And they are stunned. They had no idea about this Nazi infiltration. And they said, what are their plans? Well, let me tell you what their plans are, because their plan, one of the Nazi plans, was to kidnap and kill 24 of the top people in Hollywood. And I mean, this was not just some harebrained scheme. This was what Goebbels had ordered to be done. And on that list was Al Jolson, Eddie Cantor, Charlie Chaplin, Samuel Goldwyn, Louis B. Mayer, Walter Winchell, Frederick March, Jack Benny, Bud Schulberg, James Cagney, director William Wyler, Paul Muni. This was all on the documents that this guy, Leon Lewis, a lawyer from the ADL, was able to infiltrate and break into Nazi headquarters in downtown Los Angeles Is this
Leon.
this is him? Okay. So Leon Lewis begins to raise money to fight back against the Nazis. And this is a little bit more subtle than the head busting that Lansky has ordered, but still linked together to this national effort to push back against the Nazis. Now, we're not at war with the Nazis. The Nazis are legally able to do this. I don't know about the terrorist plot to kill all the Jews in the studio system and the stars. But these are people that are Jews that Goebbels has singled out on a list that they want them kidnapped and hung and left around Hollywood as a message when the Germans are coming into the United States. In other words, this is not just some random thing that happened on a Tuesday. This was to be carried out upon their infiltration into the United States when they were done taking over England. They were going to then invade the United States, as some people are aware. Plenty of documentation about that. So there's a guy named William Dudley Pelley. Now, William Dudley Pelley was a screenwriter, and he wrote, I want to say, about 15 different screenplays that were made into films, silent films. So I don't know if they call them screenplays. They go, here's Pelley. Now, Pelley forms a group. He had 2 O. Henry Awards. This was a very famous writer, would later form a couple of different newspapers. He forms the Silver Legion of America in 1933. He runs for president against FDR in 1936. This is an obscure character, so you may want to look this guy up. He forms this legion. They wear these uniforms with an L on the shirt for, I think it was for like love, liberty. No, it was the Legion, but the L was for love, liberty, and life or something. He once explained it. So he forms this group based on Mussolini, and he's a fascist. He's an anti-Semite. He's against Catholics. He wants to secede from the United States and form a Christian commonwealth of just Christian people in the United States. I don't know what particular states he was talking about, but they formed the Silver Shirts up in Minnesota. That's where Berman goes in and actually breaks up the mob up there. But he will later be tried for sedition. A lot of these guys, it ends for a lot of these guys in 1942 because, there's a wanted poster for Dudley. He moves to Asheville, North Carolina, but he's a big wig in LA and he's a big wig in the screenwriting business because he's written so many films that he has a certain amount of legitimacy, plus books, plus articles. So he has a lot of street cred, let me just put it that way. And he begins preaching along with Father Conklin, all this anti-Jewish stuff. And he then, with this group, it's about 15,000 of them who have these uniforms and are marching around, not unlike the German-American Bund. He's not taking his orders directly, but he starts his operation before the German-American Bund even forms. So Pelley's kind of ahead of the curve. He has a near-death experience in 1928, comes back and says he spoke to God and to Jesus, and that they told him that Hitler is going to save the world. He gets into occultism. He says he can levitate. And of course, when you say that, you got to move to Asheville, North Carolina, which is what he does. And eventually he's jailed. Oh, he says he can see through walls. And he forms a religion called Soulcraft regarding UFOs also. I mean, this guy Pelley deserves his own episode, which I think we'll do at some point. So I don't want to go too crazy on Pelley. But Pelley will eventually be arrested for sedition. And they get Fritz Kuhn on embezzlement and fraud. He begins to steal money from the American Bund. Fritz Kuhn, if there's a picture of him, I think you might have, where Fritz Kuhn, 1939, he's being sent to Sing Sing. Fritz Kuhn goes to Sing Sing because he is caught by the FBI stealing. Yeah, this is him. This is the gates of Sing Sing, actually. Everything happens at Sing Sing, bro.
Yeah, that's a post-conviction, and I have...
That's 1939 of him being taken in there. That was him, the third from the left.
And this is his arrest before that.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. So Fritz Kuhn will eventually be deported to Germany, and ironically, they put him in Dachau, which is kind of funny. He gets out, and whatever happens to him in Germany, that's his problem. His thing will be busted up by, this is all by Lansky. I mean, these camps by 1941, when the invasion happens, this all comes to an end because now we're at war with Germany. When they declare war on us, these camps go away. The mob goes away from beating up the Nazis. This is the headquarters that they had in the camp. This is the camp in Andover, New Jersey, when the local sheriff raided it. In Sussex County, New Jersey, if anybody lives there, keep your eyes open for Nazis because this was quite an operation they had there. And they were beginning to arm them. They were beginning to march with the kids and the adults, and they were beginning to train them, and they weren't playing around. They were getting ready for this invasion. Now, they also, in LA, in Rustic Canyon, which I was talking to somebody the other day about, in Rustic Canyon, oh, no, I take it back. It's Will Rogers State Park, which is right by Pacific Palisades. They built a giant fortress for Hitler, a giant fortress. You can't make this up, which is still there. The foundation is still there. They built a fortress for headquarters on the West Coast overlooking the Pacific Ocean. So when Hitler comes, he would have this huge house and fortress that was built. And it was huge. It's just the foundation is left with some graffiti now, but that's where Hitler's headquarters was going to be. And this guy, susses it out, Leon Lewis. This is all money coming out of Berlin in preparation, all designed to soften up the ground for the arrival of Hitler, where him and Fritz Kuhn would remain, obviously, to run the United States. So the defeat of the Nazis ends this, obviously, in 1945. But the involvement of the mob is so important that their patriotism and the Judaism, patriotism regarding Lucky Luciano and some of the Italians, and the Jewish mob had it because of the Germans, because of the Nazis.
Sure.
It rose above their street criminality is what I'm trying to say in this episode, where they were Americans and Jews first. And for the Italians, they wanted to get rid of Mussolini. But the Jewish gangster generationally died off right there. It wasn't handed down father to son. We assimilated. The Italians basically did not. They passed on their thing. That's why you have John Gotti Jr. That's why you have Jr. They did not go to Harvard and give up the mob. The Jews did. For the Jewish gangsters, it was a way to kick in the door and get established inside the United States as immigrants. It wasn't passed along to their children. In fact, with Lansky, Lansky has a son who has not polio, but he's got cerebral palsy. And he has another son later who will go to West Point. And that shows you the difference of where this is going. They sheltered their children, the Jewish mobsters. The Italians embraced it, and they turned it over because of trust issues to their own families. The Jews did not do that. They got out of the business. Lansky basically gets involved in just gambling in Cuba. He goes to Miami. He's being, tracked. But first, they take Bugsy Siegel, his partner, and they give him Las Vegas. They give him LA, actually. Bugsy Siegel is now involved with Mickey Cohen. And Mickey Cohen is the muscle for the Nazi beating in LA. The Nazi stuff is run through Mickey Cohen. Mickey Cohen, of course, was a boxer. There's a picture I gave to Eric of him. There's Mickey Cohen. And Mickey Cohen is another tough Jewish gangster who started out as the enforcer for Bugsy Siegel. He will later replace Bugsy Siegel, and Bugsy Siegel has both his eyes blown out. One of the eyes goes completely across the living room and hits the wall when he's killed with a carbine rifle from across the street in his Brentwood house. But the guy running the LA anti-Nazi physical campaign is Mickey Cohen. And Mickey Cohen says, I'll be glad to do it. He gets the call from Lansky, and he rounds up his group, and they beat the living shit out of the Nazis that are doing it in LA. Bugsy Siegel at this point is running or attempting to open the Flamingo, as been depicted in numerous movies where we see Bugsy Siegel trying to do this. The cost overruns themselves make the combination and make the organized crime families vote finally to assassinate him. This is a vote that is held off by Meyer Lansky on numerous occasions. Lansky puts in millions of his own money into the Flamingo. The problem is, as depicted in these movies and in truth, was Bugsy Siegel's girlfriend was flying to Switzerland to put what she was skimming off the top into a Swiss bank account. By the way, that's where Lansky kept his money. That's why the FBI was never to get their hands on the $700 million that Lansky would make from his gambling operations all over the country. So this is Mickey Cohen. They could never kill Mickey Cohen. In the episode, you want to see a story about Mickey Cohen, look at our episode on Mickey Cohen. Riddled with bullets, numerous attempts to kill him. Could not kill this guy. He was the Rasputin of gangsters, I think.
Yeah, and including explosions. I mean,
yeah, they put a bomb. They put a bomb in his living room, in his bedroom, in Brentwood, blew half the house out. It's the front page of the LA Times. He was in the bathroom. But anyway, so Bugsy Siegel has these cost overruns of the Flamingo, and Lansky is just putting up money after money. And his girlfriend, it's been debated whether he was in on it with his girlfriend or his girlfriend was just skimming and taking it to Switzerland on the weekends. But they were well aware of this, the mob. And the mob just kept saying to Lansky, you know, either you deal with this or we're going to deal with this. So finally, they vote to kill Bugsy Siegel. And he's killed in Brentwood in his living room, a couple of shots to the head from a rifle. And those guys are killed too, the guys who did the killing, actually. But the vote went down, and Lansky had a vote to kill his best friend. And him and Bugsy Siegel really were best friends. They went all the way back to 5 years old in Brownsville. So he had to learn the hard way. And Bugsy Siegel was replaced by Mickey Cohen. And that's in the episode if you want to see the Mickey Cohen episode. But also Bugsy, you want to see the movie, it's pretty accurate. If you want to look at that. So anyway, so the mob is now voting on who to kill and who not to kill. So because there's Bugsy Siegel, real ladies man, but he was the muscle for Lansky when Lansky had his Bugsy Meyer gang. So he was the muscle. Mickey Cohen was the muscle for Bugsy Siegel as an enforcer. So they all had a guy like this. Even though he was short in stature, Mickey Cohen, he was a brutally vicious killer and gangster, and not brilliantly smart, but a thug, a muscle. Anyway, so Bugsy Siegel gets eliminated. The next day after he's killed, Lansky takes over control of the Flamingo Hotel. He sends in two of his men, Greenbaum and another cat. Oh, and also Mo Green is killed. As we see in The Godfather, where he's shot. That's supposed to be Bugsy Siegel, but there's another guy who is killed who was an underling of Bugsy Siegel. But anyway, so Lansky takes over the Flamingo, and he owns a percentage of that hotel. He owns a percentage of a number of these hotels, but he takes his money and puts it in Switzerland. He then goes and meets and helps fund the overthrow of a guy. Maybe not an overthrow. He pays the president of Cuba $250,000 to step out of the way. And then Batista, the guy he does want to run Cuba, takes over. But the guy was actually bribed by Lansky to leave his position as president of Cuba. And then there's a coup d'etat of sorts where Batista takes over the island of Cuba and offers a dollar for dollar matching fund to anyone who wants to open a casino in Cuba. So Lansky throws down $1 million, and then Batista throws down $1 million. So they begin to open these casinos in Havana, and it becomes gigantic. These are not rigged casinos; these are plush pads. It completely skyrockets the Cuban economy. It was the highest level that the Cubans had ever lived economically when Lansky ran these casinos there because of the jobs and the money being spread around because of the casinos, multiple casinos, high-end casinos and hotels. This is what Lansky brought to Havana. And that brought in some of the other members of the mob who Lansky, said, if you want to invest, you're more than welcome to invest. This will all end with the overthrow of Batista, obviously, by Castro in 1959, where they nationalized the casinos. This Batista, an early photo of Batista. He was obviously corrupt, but having a commie dictator, with no casinos, Castro and Che immediately nationalized the casinos and make gambling illegal, and then kill everyone involved with it. I mean, he leaves. Lansky leaves Havana, which you could see by Hyman Roth. Just so you know, the amount of people who've depicted Lansky in films is endless. I mean, he's depicted, I think, by Lee Strasberg. The famous Strasberg acting school was run by Lee Strasberg, and he depicts Hyman Roth, who is the Lansky and the Godfather, for people who don't know. Dustin Hoffman will play Lansky in a film called The Lost City in 2005. Harvey Keitel plays Lansky in a movie called Lansky in 2021. Richard Dreyfuss, I saw that one recently, plays Lansky in 1999, only for not for half the movie, but it flashes back. A lot of these movies flash back. So Max Perlich, who I love, who was in Drugstore Cowboy, for people who've seen that film, he plays the young Lansky. And then Richard Dreyfuss is the older Lansky. Ben Kingsley plays Lansky in Bugsy, if people remember the 1991 film with Warren Beatty. It's probably the best of the group. And then there's one with Sidney Pollack, a movie called Havana, where my friend Mark Rydell, later president of the Actors Studio, the great director on Golden Pond, who was in also the movie with James Dean, Rebel with a Cause. He plays Lansky in that 1990 Sidney Pollack film, Havana, with Robert Redford. So amazingly, Lansky has been depicted in so many films, but he famously calls up Lee Strasberg after The Godfather premiere and says, "You did a pretty good job. You could have made me more sympathetic." It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny. But so they were always wondering what happened to Lansky's money, because the FBI estimated that he earned $700 million over the course of his lifetime with these hotels and casinos. And FBI went crazy trying to find his money. They could never find it. And he left an estate of like $157,000 when he died. However, in 1971, this is a good-looking Lansky there. 2010, rather, his daughter, Lansky's daughter, said publicly that in 1971, he transferred $15 million in 1971 money to his brother when the IRS was closing in on him. He was only convicted of illegal gambling, like some sort of illegal gambling beef, once in his life. He was never convicted of anything. But anyway, he tries to go to Israel, and because of the right of return to Israel, he has the right to, as we all do, become Israeli citizens, which is our Alamo in a way, as Jews around the world. And that's why there's such incredible support, among other reasons, for the state of Israel among American Jews and Jews around the world. It is our Alamo. We have a right to go there and live there and become American citizens if you have a Jewish mother and Jewish birth. And so Lansky flees to Israel and tries to become an Israeli citizen. But there's a caveat. If you have a criminal history, the Israeli government can deny you citizenship, which Lansky does. So Lansky spreads money around. He stays in Israel for 2 years, but the Nixon administration really has their hot to get him, right? So in 1948, Lansky's contacted by Golda Meir, and she says, "We need money and arms for the state of Israel," and he gives them tons of money and tons of arms in 1948. This is who they went to, among other people. I mean, my father went over there, and my aunt was running guns, and a lot of Jews were involved in this. But so were these Jewish gangsters. And they went to Lansky in one of his hotels, and they asked him to contribute, which he did. He contributed millions. So he was embittered. It went all the way to the Israeli Supreme Court, and he was finally rejected for citizenship from pressure from the United States State Department, by the way, Eric. There was immense pressure and internal pressure on Israel to do this. If there wasn't any pressure, I think they would have granted him citizenship, in my opinion. So anyway, he's deported from Israel and he returns to Miami, where he lives out the rest of his life in Miami, never convicted, never goes to jail for any of these beefs, and keeps a low profile in Miami for the rest of his life. However, they never could find the money, and the FBI was after him. I'd say well into the 70s, watching him nonstop to see where the money was, and he just lived small. This is him in Israel near the end of his life in the 70s.
Yeah, I think he lived to, 83?
No, I think 80. I think he died of lung cancer.
I'm at 1983.
Oh, yeah. I don't. Yeah. I think he was 80 years old. But anyway, so smoked a lot. He smoked 4 packs a day. Something's going to happen. But hey, if you could do what he did, make $700 million, live to your 80, and smoke 4 packs a day, knock yourself out. I mean, that's quite a trade-off.
Live longer than his peers.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of his old friends didn't make it. I mean, Louis Capone, and Mendy Weiss and Buckhalter, they got the hot seat, but he never did, and he killed people too. I mean, he was involved in some murders, but they realized early on the thing that Arnold Rothstein taught them was to get into the liquor business, and that's what Rothstein taught Lansky. And what Lansky came up with Rothstein, this was in 1928, was to have the liquor brought over from England, put the ships off the coast of Long Island and Montauk, drive the trucks out to Montauk Point, which is the very end of Long Island, bribe all these little town cops to let them go through, give them cases of liquor, and drive the liquor from the boats out on the tip of Long Island into Manhattan. That's where Lansky started to make his bones with Rothstein. Rothstein eventually assassinated in New York in a hotel. But that's what he learned. And he said, you're going to get picked off by various mobsters, not the police. It was going to be mobsters who want to do what you're doing, other young guys. And you got to ride with a crew. And that's where they began to crew up into these gangs and these truck caravans, bringing in the stuff, not from the cops. The cops were easy to deal with. They would just pay off the cops. That was not a problem. It was other mobsters trying to get their hands on the liquor and distribute it themselves, because the operation involved Rothstein putting up money to bring these ships. I mean, think about the cost involved in starting this up, Eric. You got to bring in ships from England to New York Harbor or New York area waterways and unload it. And the amount of money had to be funded by Rothstein. And this is what Lansky and Bugsy Siegel went to him and talked to him about. And that's what put him on the map. Later, gambling, but at first it was liquor. And Lansky said, look, they did away with prohibition finally. Perlman was one of the guys who voted to, Perlman as a congressman, by the way, was one of the congressmen who voted to do away with prohibition because he met Lansky through these speakeasies. That's how Perlman knew him. Some people said it was the courts, but others said it was the speakeasies and the liquor, because Perlman liked his liquor. So anyway, so you've got the British involved, and you've got these ships coming from England. I mean, it's pretty far. I mean, the Purple Gang in Detroit, which was another Jewish mob, smuggled it through the Seagram's family down through Detroit from Canada. But that was another operation over land. The easiest way for people in New York was through Long Island, through coming from Europe. But that's not the way it was up in Canada through Detroit. So that was that. And then in Florida, you had it coming up via Cuba and the islands down there. So it was multiple ways. I mean, there was no way to stop it because the demand was so high. But Lansky said, at the end of the day, they took over the liquor business we started. They took over the gambling business we started. The government took over the lotto business, the numbers that we started. The government basically was their competitor. That's why they put him out. And also, the story on J. Edgar Hoover, Lansky had the photos of the orgies with Hoover and Clyde Tolson and Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn learned about blackmail from Lansky because Roy Cohn was involved in these gay sex orgies with Clyde Tolson and J. Edgar Hoover. The reason Hoover said there was no organized crime his entire life was because Lansky held the cards to keep Hoover in check. Hoover went after commies because he couldn't go after the mob, and eventually went after Nazis in 1940 and 1939. 1939, he would start to go after Nazis when espionage rings started to show up in New York. And Hoover did turn and start going after the Nazis. But he famously said there's no such thing as organized crime. There was no organized crime. And that was one of the reasons. The reasons is that Lansky held the photos of Hoover being involved in gay sex orgies. And that was Lansky's carte blanche. And Roy Cohn himself later, as a legitimate lawyer, will do the same thing to his political enemies. And I suggest to you today, that's what every single situation is strangling our government right now, is various power people hold various cards on numerous people like Lindsey Graham, like Mitch McConnell, who are both gay. They have these cards on them, and they make them dance to their puppet song whenever they want. We've seen various people do very weird things politically in the past number of years. Apparently, blackmail has become the #1 power thing in U.S. politics, but it started with Meyer Lansky and Hoover as a big game blackmail, and then Roy Cohn took it to another level after the death of Hoover. But we're seeing that a lot, and we're seeing it today, and it's a strangulation of our government in many ways, because anytime somebody tries to do anything progressive, and I don't mean that in a political sense, but progressive to get us out of this mess, they are brought back into the here's Roy Cohn,
who I've already. He was a major influence on Trump back in the 80s.
I don't think he's a major influence on Trump at all. He met with Trump and he talked to Trump. So what? I mean, there's people who talk with everyone. I mean, the major influence for Trump was the meeting with Nixon. And that meeting went on for hours and hours and hours. And Roger Stone talks about setting up that meeting. And Nixon taught him, he was supposed to meet with him for an hour. He ended up meeting with him for 8 hours over 2 days or something. And Nixon taught him presidential politics, from what I understand. I mean, Roy Cohn knew a lot of people. I mean, my personal opinion is that he was not a major influence on Trump himself, because Trump never acts like a Roy Cohn. In fact, if he had a Roy Cohn, he would be better off.
Okay, I thought it was his lawyer for a while, but okay.
Yeah. Well, so was Michael. So was Michael Cohen, right?
Well, yeah, different spelling, but sure. All right. So we've got a ton of support that's been floating in while we were watching this or talking. David Parsons, some think Lindbergh killed his son because of a birth defect. Lindbergh was in eugenics.
Yeah, you could see the Lindbergh episode if you want to get into that. Some of these we've covered. Some of these we'll cover a little in the future. But that is on the map. It is on the map. I mean, Lindbergh loved Hitler. He loved eugenics. The eugenics industry was centered in Pasadena, California, not so far where I live now, where I used to live. And was, I mean, Hitler cited repeatedly the American eugenics movement as an inspiration for his own eugenics anti-Semitic movement.
David Parsons wants to say he understood one of the mob thugs was a man named Jack Rubenstein.
Where's this guy been the whole show?
I think this came in earlier, Dave.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Lynn Gibson's a new member. Thank you very much. Jay Kurtz. Mark's jacket and his poor quality video watching in HD yields Maury patterns.
I don't know what he's talking about.
I'm sorry, Jay. Hopefully next time you'll get over it.
Okay.
Mo Bishop, it sounds like John Wick.
Sounds like John Wick. I'm not sure that.
It may be Barney, the badass boxer.
Barney Ross?
Yeah, maybe that. You described a scene where he's pretty much unstoppable and fighting everybody.
With the Japanese, you mean? Or that,
I guess, yeah. And that's
like that was in Guadalcanal. I mean, yeah. I mean, he just a real heroic night for him, and saving his one guy. Oh yeah, there is a little crazy stuff with the jacket.
Merry Christmas to you too, David Dearman, who's been a member for 2 months. But Little Rock showing him he's been a member for 17 months.
Wow.
Milestone, happy 17 months. Thank you very much. That's continued support. Sergeant Willie, the patriotism of the mob is kind of like the premise of the movie The Rocketeer, one of the last decent Disney movies.
I like that movie. I can't remember it completely. I want to take another look at it. But look, I mean, it's historical. I mean, they are Americans. I mean, that doesn't. I mean, it's so funny because what Lansky does is he's really running a business. You know what I mean? And it's kind of a gray area. He operates, as he said repeatedly, I operate in the gray areas. You know, once he becomes legitimate, you know, they build Las Vegas from the ground up. I mean, Bugsy Siegel starts it. The mob takes it over, but they're not running it now. And they made money, but the people making it now are making even more money. And talk to the Native Americans, how they got involved in this stuff.
Well, that's when the mafia knew that there were people more bloodthirsty called corporations.
Yeah.
Well,
he said we're bigger than U.S. Steel, famously to his daughter and his wife.
And maybe he was then.
Yeah.
Mark Rydell also directed the John Wayne Great, The Cowboys, which you've told stories about.
I think we covered that. Mark Rydell told me the great story of it.
Yep.
His first directing gig with John Wayne. I think we've covered that story before.
Yep. Shane Culkin, thank you guys so much for covering this interesting and very relevant true American story.
Yeah, I think it's relevant because of what's going on today. I didn't just pull this story out of my ass. I mean, I've known this story we all know this story growing up as Jews in New York. I mean, this is nothing earth-shattering to me, but again, history repeats itself. And I think we're at that precipice right now. I mean, everything looks the same, sounds the same. I mean, famously, in the middle of this mob yesterday in New York, they verbally and physically started jostling a guy who got into a screaming match with them about his support of the state of Israel. And lo and behold, it's Alec Baldwin. So you're talking about strange bedfellows. I mean, Baldwin is surrounded by Palestinians with the masks on, with the kefir things over their faces. And he gave as good as he could get. You know, I mean, this is an Irish brawler, Baldwin.
Yeah, he was doing the full Baldwin. Like
he went the full Baldwin on these Palestinian Nazis. Very proud of him yesterday. Very proud of that. That was the old Alec. That's the Alec I love.
Well, it was like the paparazzi.
Yeah, it was like, but this was a political paparazzi.
Sure.
And he was surrounded by New York cops who got him out of there. But he gave as good as he could get at that point, Baldwin.
Yeah, he didn't seem to hold back at all.
No.
Al Gonzalez, the area around Picatinny Arsenal in Jersey was heavily German in World War II. Bombs and artillery shells were made there. They rounded up a lot of Germans and sent them elsewhere as they feared sabotage.
That's true. I mean, that whole area was through and through Nazis. And in fact, we saw it with World War I, Eric, you know, and the story about the island explosion that we did.
Yeah,
Tom's Island. Black Tom's Island.
Black Tom, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that was riddled with Nazi saboteurs trying to prevent artillery, again, going over to Europe through the port in New Jersey to fight in World War I before we got in. Very similar situation in World War II, this time out of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. But U-2 submarines picking off tons of U.S. ships.
All right, and coming in last with the most, Basil Beshkov.
Yeah, no, that's a typical thing. Epstein with the blackmail. Yes, this is going on every level of the elites. That's how they're holding each other in check. It's not a cabal like the thing with Klaus Schwab that's politically ideological. This is the American elites here that have dirt on each other. And Epstein was the dirt keeper. Someone else will replace Epstein. It's not going to go away. I mean, all of these people put their eggs in the Epstein basket, and some of them got burned. Most of them didn't. But that's why Epstein had to go bye-bye.
Mm-hmm. And that's why we don't hear anything either, because he was being run by intelligence.
Well, they were aware. Let's put it that way.
Oh, okay. I saw his very short sentence in the.
Well, I mean, if you look at the sentencing guidelines, he, if you read them, he agreed in writing and signed it to be an FBI informant on, and he successfully received a letter from the FBI after 7 or 8 years that he did their bidding. Nobody seems to point this out. That part of the deal that they made for him, his lawyers, to give him a reduced sentence was for him to become an FBI informant. I don't know about the CIA. I don't know about Mossad. I don't know about any of that crap. He legitimately had a legal binding arrangement with the Federal Bureau of Investigation to become an undercover informant for the FBI. That's in the deal memo. It's in the deal memo. And there's also a letter signing off that he successfully completed that deal. And that eliminated his sentence until the lawyer who represented a bunch of 35-year-old fashion models, David Weiss, not David Weiss, I forget, David, who was Clinton's attorney. He wanted to make money, rounded up these fashion models and sued him. That got the case reopened. Even though he had done his time, even though he had signed this deal memo with the FBI, the case was reopened criminally. That's how he ends up in Rikers Island. It was insane. This deal, he had done everything that they asked. There was no grounds for that reopening of his case. And that's how he ends up bushwhacked and put into Rikers Island, where he's murdered.
Yeah. David Parsons, they're naming the table, cute, in the Hart Senate building in honor of Barney Frank.
That's funny. I saw that video last night, the uncut version of that video. I don't know what to say anymore. The shit that's going on in that White House, between the trannies and that Nutcracker suite and the cocaine and this guy making a gay porno film, and it's just endless. And remember the famous quote by Jill Biden in 2020, the famous tweet.
Oh, we're going to bring dignity back to the...
No, she said decency is on the ballot. Sorry. Yeah, decency is on the ballot. Well, I guess it was.
Yeah, it lost. There were German subs in Sandy Hook near Rumson and Seabright at the start of World War II.
That's right. That's absolutely true. And well before the war, more importantly, well before the war.
Wow. And then last one again, Lynn Blickstein. I told my father about this story when he was alive, being that my father and me hated socialism, any stripe. He said, good. Hope the gangsters kick their ass.
Yeah.
Yes,
everybody was proud of them. Everybody knew about it. You understand, these gangsters were heroes to begin with when we were growing up. Not this group in particular, but for me. But generationally, they were considered anti-heroes, like in the films later on that were depicted in Hollywood in the 70s.
Well, the 30s, the gangsters too.
Right. This was, Jimmy Cagney was portraying these guys. This was people, the regular working stiffs looked at these guys as anti-heroes for them, that they, stuck it to the man. They didn't want to be them, but they could live romantically through them. They killed each other, for Christ's sakes. They weren't killing innocent people. When they had beefs, they took care of each other. So, years later, the same thing would happen under Gotti and other groups, and the feds had a job to do to bust up this thing. They might have done it with Valachi. We're not really sure if there's any remnants left of the New York City mob. I know the Gambino family still operates, because we used to try to go past their little island in Tobay when we were kids in high school. And Tommy Barada famously told me the story, who owns Mary Lou's restaurant on 9th Street. I don't know if Tommy Barada's still there, but Mary Lou's was a mob joint run by the Gambino family. And he told me this story about Jack Nicholson coming out to learn about the mob for the movie Prizzi's Honor. And Tommy Barada took him out to a Gambino sit down at the house, and for a weekly sit down with the other mob families. And Nicholson didn't want to leave. He had to yank him out of there because they got into some other business. And Barada took out Nicholson from the meeting. And in fact, they gave him a small part in the movie in Prizzi's Honor. But so that was still functioning at that time, and I still think it probably is, but not like it was in the heyday there.
All right. Well, that's wrapping this up, and by now, hopefully, people have gotten the idea that we're going to shift over to locals for a few minutes for an after party, unstructured.locals.com. Again, you can follow us for free there. You don't have to pay. We like it if you pay, obviously. Oswald likes it if you pay, but you don't have to pay. consider following us over there. It allows us to let you know what's going on in case something goes wrong. Last Friday,
What's going to go wrong? What are you talking about?
I've already got a warning on Layback News. And
For what?
a video deleted.
What?
Yeah.
What kind of video?
Demonetized.
What?
It was the legal panel.
Okay, what happened?
Yeah, it's a legal panel, and they're claiming supposed medical misinformation for something that was said in the video.
No.
The video is removed. There's a warning. If I already had the warning, it would be a strike, and it would affect this too. So it's really important, folks, to consider following us over there, so at least we can keep in contact with you. And ironically, that particular warning came about from something Viva Fry said on the
dude, he's a saboteur, this guy Fry. Why didn't you keep him in Boca Raton? What are you letting him on your channel for?
I don't know.
He's going to destroy you.
Apparently.
What are you, nuts?
Apparently, but for now, we're going to go to locals. We're going to be safe. Everybody, follow us now. There's a link in our descriptions.
I can't wait to get over to locals.
We got to go, man. Got to go because it's bad.